Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Warning. The following has suggestive content that is not suitable for some listeners. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 50. Secretive Sandies. Bella's point of view. The sounds of a purposeless and soothing jazz number floated through the lobby of Dr. Carmen's office. It was fairly early, the sun's rays still shining intensely through the large window beside the entrance. I rubbed at my eyes with the sleeves of my hoodie, and grimaced, my leg bobbing up and down. The wait was excruciating. I strained my ears to hear something, longed for X-ray vision, or some kind of superhuman hearing. But I caught nothing. Not a murmur or muffled voice. Just the generic jazz music. I felt trapped inside the Weather Channel's local forecast. I tugged at my sleeves and lolled my head back, my restlessness seeming to annoy the blonde receptionist. Fuck her. She spent way too much time reading gossip magazines. The plastic chairs, curved and modern and designed for comfort, made my bones ache. My eyes fixed to the knob of her door, willing it to open and for Edward to emerge. Smiling. Dr. Carmen had not let me join them when Edward and I came in that morning. I'd actually sat myself on the sofa in her office beside him, expecting to be present during their discussion. But Dr. Carmen had walked in, and promptly kicked me out. Some crap about honesty being easier between 2 and 3 being a crowd. I'd been rather upset about her dismissal, looking to Edward for support, but instead, I found him to be just accepting. Maybe he had wanted to speak to her alone all along. I couldn't locate the source of my anxiety over the meeting. I was worried about Edward disliking Carmen, of this fear I was certain. There was nothing I wanted more than his full support, and that was already shaky at best. I felt as though their conversation this morning would shape his impression of therapy in general. I had more reasons than my own to hope he emerged with a positive one. Conversely, I wanted Carmen to like Edward. I feared that she would see something in him that would force her to discourage our relationship. Already over the past week, she had offered more relationship advice than I could stomach at times. She wanted me to chill out, and let it happen, and find out what he's looking for, before I jumped the gun. She'd winked with that one. She wanted us to build the kind of trust and comfort that made us admit to gross and horrible things, and look out for number 1, before I let number 2 make us a 3. Whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. She wanted me to learn from our many screw-ups during our time swimming in the river of denial, and use that wisdom to get what a relationship is really meant to be. She wanted me to be open, even if it makes me look like a sappy, girly moron, and give him time to adjust to Cullen life, and the overload of estrogen in his once testosterone-filled household. She wanted me to be patient. Fuck patience. I thought bitterly. Patience was obviously necessary, but living with Edward wasn't nearly as glamorous as I'd once dreamed. There was this invisible wall separating us that was only dropped in private, and even then, only partially. I wondered how long I'd be forced to tap on it before that wall would finally fall, and we could be us again. I couldn't decide who was even responsible for its presence. I was probably still a little skeptical about the depth of Edward's commitment, but he had his own reservations, whatever they were. How wrong was it of me to just want everything to be perfect for once? I filed this question away for a later discussion with Carmen or Carlisle, or even Edward if the time was right. This last week had been awkward to say the least. Edward and I had put our reconnecting on hold for his return to school. He'd been swamped with all of the makeup assignments, and had agreed to let me help, but only after a very long argument. Thus, we'd wake up, get dressed in separate bedrooms, go downstairs, and eat with Alice, as me and Carlisle, and I'd ride to school with Alice, while he'd pick up Jasper. When we'd arrive, Alice and I would part ways, while Edward walked me to class. It was mostly as it had been before, with minor deviations. Our first morning back, I decided that I didn't want his electric hum soothing me as we entered the school. He'd appeared a little hurt when I'd first shrugged him off, but I couldn't not. I hadn't wanted him believing that his touch was my motivation for being at his side. I walked with Edward because I enjoyed his company, not because I needed his calming effect. It had been difficult to deny myself and sacrifice what could have so easily made every experience pleasurable, but I'd done it. Edward had been worried about my recovery. He'd feared it would make my desire for him dissipate because I'd no longer need him. If I could show him that I didn't need him now, then maybe he'd understand that I was with him because he was kind and understanding, and funny and beautiful and loyal, and the sensations of his fingers against my flesh were only one reason in a long list of what made my desire for Edward so permanent. When I'd told him how much it had meant to me to do it on my own, he'd understood somewhat, and it had shown in his small grin of encouragement. But I knew it bothered him, and in turn, that bothered me. All in all, our interactions had grown benign, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't like the connection had dimmed. It was just being controlled. Well, until Friday, I smirked absently, recalling what had happened after I'd returned from boxing with Alice. The way in which I'd attacked him really was unforgivable. The delicious smudge of brown batter right below his jaw was begging for the attention, and my tongue had longed to grant it. He met me halfway as I flew at him, wrapping his fingers around my waist and drawing me closer as our lips met. I was praying as I parted my lips that he'd really kiss me for once, and I was rewarded in full when his tongue plunged into my mouth. Every bit of air escaped my lungs, my eyes rolled back. My knees went weak, birds sang, clouds parted, the distant melody of Hallelujah could be heard, all of that cliched crap, that just basically meant, your tongue rocks my freaking world. Edward Mimas t-shirt plus cake batter times boxing plus endorphins equals horny Bella. It's an elementary equation. But it had been too much. The trickle had gone from a drip to a rushing cascade in mere seconds, and we'd been unprepared for the intensity of it. Truthfully, I probably would have humped him on the kitchen counter, and this only served to prove how irrational my state of mind was. We weren't there yet. Even a complete moron like me could see that. He'd just given up on his mother, losing the only blood tie he had in this world, and I was only just beginning the fight against my condition, and accepting how very slow and difficult that might be. Edward and I were fragile and delicate. It might have taken me a long time, but I was finally beginning to appreciate the responsibility of our many burdens. I had to give them the attention and respect they deserved if I was ever going to get better. With this thought, my mood sank impossibly lower, and I frowned at my worn sleeve cuffs. The evidence of the last year in Forks was apparent in the fraying of its dark fabric. I furrowed my brows as I inspected it, and pondered buying a new one, but that didn't seem right. Before I could let my mind wander far enough to completely distract me, I heard a curious noise coming from her office. My spine straightened. It was like a muffled murmur in a deep voice. Definitely Edward. I furtively slid my chair closer to the door, my eyes fixed on the magazine-absorbed receptionist. I settled a couple feet from the door, my ear straining in the direction of the dark wood. Then there was nothing but silence. It was downright eerie. I gnawed at my lip and began absently bouncing the heel of my foot once again. My eyes remained focused on the knob as I battled to hear anything further. The soothing jazz number finally ended, transitioning to a new song with a static silence. That's when I heard it. An entirely undeniable,
"Who the fuck do you think you are?"
came billowing from the room in the form of Edward's enraged voice. I flinched so abruptly that the legs of my chair squeaked on the linoleum. The receptionist didn't even appear fazed as she licked her fingertip and turned a page. I was still processing the new occurrence when the door suddenly swung open. Every muscle in my body tensed as Edward emerged, brows pulled together and nostrils flared. He clutched his jacket in his hand, his fingers curled into it in a shaking fist as his eyes searched for me. When his furious gaze landed on mine, I blanched, swallowing loudly, but then, Something about my expression made his own face soften infinitesimally. He held his hand out, palm up, to me, and implored,
"Can we leave?"
He was visibly trying to rein in his anger, his eyes fixed to mine as his fingers flexed into the leather. I took his hand without hesitation, and it was warm and gentle as his fingers laced with mine. I caught Carmen's eyes and small grin as we passed her door. She called after us, "I'll see you soon, Edward." His steps were hasty and loud against the floor, as he called loud enough to make a scene.
"Fuck you very much."
Across from me, Edward propped his elbow against the back of his booth seat, glowering out the window mutely. He'd insisted on taking me to breakfast, though I couldn't fathom why. He was clearly not in the mood to go out anywhere. The ride here from Carmen's office had been anything but uneventful. 2 cars in front of us had turned without signaling. This produced a number of expletives, and Edward's raging tirade on what he referred to as the Folkestone Signal Massacre, for which he'd personally volunteered himself to manage the protest. The shoving of various turn signal levers up passes was mentioned with frequency. Then, when we'd arrived at the diner, the man exiting had failed to hold the door open for me. Edward had managed to restrain any direct dialogue with him, but I was fairly certain, had I not been present, there would have been an interesting exchange of words. When we ordered our food, the waitress's lack of necessity to write down our orders had peeved him, and resulted in his promise to seriously lose his shit if she fucked our order up. His attitude was stressing me the hell out. I ground my teeth and pressed my lips together, and let him work through his frustrations, before I said something to make it worse. And I really hoped that he was working through his frustrations, as he sat there, flicking his fingers as his arm hung off the booth. I worried sometimes that he wasn't sure how to do that anymore. Before, he'd smoke a cigarette, or take it out on Emmett, or just avoid people altogether. He didn't have any of those luxuries anymore. Now he just had to let everyone see it, and learn to let things go. Letting things go was not Edward's forte. When our food arrived, he narrowed his eyes at the plates, and did a mental checklist of everything we'd asked for: French toast for me with powdered sugar, and a side of bacon, and ham and eggs for him, scrambled with cheese. I suppressed an eye roll when he asked adulterously for our napkin dispenser to be refilled. The waitress didn't seem at all bothered by his attitude, and quickly accommodated his every request. I reasoned that she probably dealt with assholes a little too often for her own good. We ate in complete silence. Not companionable or comfortable, but uneasy and stifling. The air between us was so charged with his frustrated tension, that it was infectious. I almost snapped at the waitress myself, when she asked to refill our drinks for the 4th time. Eventually, I'd lost my appetite, and had begun prodding at my toast disinterestedly.
"You're not hungry?"
Edward observed in a questioning voice. When I raised my gaze to him, he was staring at his plate, stabbing at his ham as his eyes tightened.
"You didn't eat much last night,"
he accused, dropping his fork, and raising his eyes to mine. Curving a brow, I asked, "Just how much did I eat?" Without pause he answered,
"Half of an enchilada and 2 bites of rice,"
and took a hard pull from his straw. I simply stared blankly at him, my fork impaled through my 2 pieces of toast. Well, I wasn't aware someone had been keeping track of my caloric intake, I replied dryly. He rolled his eyes, working one side of his cheek upward.
"You said you take care of yourself. Excuse the fuck out of me for caring."
He diverted his gaze to his plate once again, his eyes now impossibly more irritated. "Just great, this won't work," I murmured, dropping my fork, and pressing my back against the booth with a sigh. Sparing me a brief glance, he huffed.
"What won't work?"
"This," I snapped, waving my hand back and forth between us. Instead of looking me in the eye, he rigidly turned to the window at his side, glaring out of it unseeingly, as the muscles of his jaw tightened. "Are you going to tell me what happened this morning? Or just spend an indefinite amount of time in a crappy mood?" I asked. He rolled his eyes again, but didn't meet my gaze.
"I'm not in a crappy mood,"
he responded brusquely, propping his elbow on the table, and running his fingers through his hair. I simply waited, watching.